500 years before Christ, a prophet wrote the exact name of the mountain where Jesus is going to return. He didn't write a metaphor. He didn't write a hazy cloud or a symbol that everyone interprets however they like. He wrote a proper name, a place you can look up on a map today, that you can reach on foot from the Lion's Gate in less than 20 minutes. And where thousands of people stand every morning, taking photos, without the faintest idea of what the text says about the ground they're standing on. And there's something even stranger. That same mountain already appears in another scene. A scene most Christians know by heart, and that they nevertheless never connect with the prophet. Freeze the image with me for a second. 11 men, standing, heads thrown back, mouths open, necks tense. They're looking at the sky. They've just seen a man go up, not metaphorically go up, and the cloud took him away. And they're still there, frozen, with their eyes fixed on a piece of empty air where 3 seconds ago there was a body. Luke describes the scene in Acts 1, verse 9, and then he does something almost no one notices. He writes a geographical note. A single line, almost administrative, of the kind a historian adds, so the reader knows where he's standing. Acts 1, verse 12, then they returned to Jerusalem from the mountain called Olivet. There it is, the name. And now I want you to hold those two things in your head at the same time, because out of the tension between them comes this entire video. The disciples are standing on the Mount of Olives watching Jesus leave. And 500 years earlier, a prophet named Zechariah had written that on a future day, the feet of the Lord would stand on the Mount of Olives. The point of departure and the point of return are the same piece of ground. No one in that scene knew it. Not one of the 11 had any idea. They were so stunned that 2 men dressed in white had to appear and ask them almost impatiently why they were still there looking up. And they said to them a sentence that in Greek carries a tiny word of 5 letters that almost no translation manages to weigh properly. We're going to get to that word. Keep it in a corner of your head, because when we open it, the entire scene changes color. However, before that, I have to ask you an uncomfortable question. Why did no one else say it? Think about it calmly. The Bible has giant prophets. Isaiah wrote 66 chapters and speaks of the end of days with a force that still leaves whoever reads it aloud without breath. Daniel saw the Son of Man come with the clouds of heaven. Joel described the sun going dark and the moon turning to blood. Ezekiel saw armies, mountains, an entire temple measured cubit by cubit, and none of them says where, not one. They all describe the what. The sky splits, the stars go out, the nations tremble. The king appears, grandiose, cosmic, impossible to forget, but abstract. It's a scene with no mailing address. Zechariah is the only one who gives the coordinates, and he doesn't stop there. Because besides giving the place, he describes what happens to the ground when the weight touches the soil. He describes the geology of the impact, and he uses a Hebrew verb so specific, so loaded, that when you understand where that verb comes from, you're going to realize that Zechariah was not describing a landing. He was describing something else, something that had already happened before, 1,000 years earlier, in a completely different place, with water instead of stone. And that is the heart of this video. In the next few minutes, you're going to understand why the most ignored book of the Old Testament is, at the same time, one of the most quoted by the apostles. You're going to see why the evangelists turned to Zechariah more than to almost any other text when they had to narrate the hardest week of their lives. You're going to discover a translation error, a real error, documented, committed by the most respected Jewish scholars of antiquity, that erased with a single stroke the most important word of chapter 12. And you're going to see how the apostles noticed it, corrected it, and carried on as if nothing had happened. And at the end, we're going to arrive at the strangest verse in the whole book, a verse that speaks of the little bells of horses. Yes, bells. the jingles a pack animal wears hanging from its neck. It sounds ridiculous until you understand what was engraved on them and where that inscription had come from before. When you understand it, you're not going to be able to read the end of the Hebrew Bible the same way again. And before we start, I want to ask you one thing. Write in the comments a single word, the name of the prophet you thought had described the return in the most detail. Isaiah, Daniel, Joel, Ezekiel, whichever. Write it now before watching the video, and then read your own comment again when you finish. I want you to see for yourself what moved in you. We're going to start with what's missing, because to understand how strange what Zechariah did is, first you have to see how much silence there is around him. And that silence is so great that once you notice it, you can't stop seeing it. 4 prophets, not a single coordinate among the 4. Let's go one by one. Let's start with Isaiah because he's the giant. Isaiah is the prophet the church has quoted more than any other. He's the one who wrote about the child who would be born of a virgin, the one who described the suffering servant in chapter 53 with a detail that still today makes whoever reads it tremble with the gospel open beside it. And when Isaiah speaks of the end, he doesn't hold back. In chapters 24 through 27, he writes what the specialists call the apocalypse of Isaiah. The earth is emptied. The earth staggers like a drunkard. The windows on high are opened. The moon is ashamed, and the sun is confounded. And God reigns on Mount Zion before his elders in glory. It's overwhelming. It's enormous. And it's a map without names. In chapter 63, Isaiah sees someone coming from Edom with garments stained red, treading the winepress alone with no one to help him. It's the image John will borrow 1,000 years later for the rider of Revelation 19, the one who comes with his robe soaked in blood. But notice what Isaiah gives us. He gives us an address of origin. He comes from Edom, from Bozrah. He tells us where the one who arrives is coming from. He doesn't tell us where he arrives. It's a tiny difference. It's an enormous difference. Daniel. Daniel is the other heavyweight. And Daniel has the verse Jesus himself chose to describe himself in the gravest moment of his life. When the high priest interrogates him under oath in Matthew 26 and asks him if he is the Christ, the Son of God, Jesus answers and quotes Daniel 7. He says they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven. That's the text. That's the passage Jesus chose as his own eschatological identity card. And if you and I were arguing about which prophet described the second coming with the most authority, Daniel wins that argument without breaking a sweat, because Jesus himself put him in his mouth. But now ask the question again, and ask it with surgical precision. Where does the Son of Man land in Daniel 7? It doesn't say. Daniel describes a movement upward, not downward. The Son of Man comes with the clouds to the Ancient of Days, and dominion, glory, and a kingdom are given to him. It's a scene of celestial court, of enthronement. It's magnificent, and it has no ground. Joel gives you the sun turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the great and terrible day of the Lord comes. Peter is going to quote those words at Pentecost before thousands of people in Acts 2. Joel also mentions a valley, the valley of Jehoshaphat, where God will gather the nations to judge them. But here's a detail almost no one tells you. The location of that valley is disputed. The name itself, Jehoshaphat, means the Lord judges. That is, the name of the place is a description of what happens there. Many commentators read it as a symbolic place name, not as a physical address. And Ezekiel. Ezekiel gives you Gog and Magog in chapters 38 and 39, gives you the dry bones rising in 37, and gives you an entire temple, measured with a reed in the last 9 chapters. Ezekiel is so concrete that he gives measurements. But notice what he measures. He measures the building. He doesn't say where the one who arrives stands. Are you starting to see the gap? 4 of the greatest prophets in the Bible, hundreds of verses about the final day. Sky split, stars extinguished, nations gathered, the dead rising, a king enthroned, a new temple, and not a single coordinate of the contact. Now stay with that feeling of a gap, because we're going to fill it. But to understand the weight of what Zechariah wrote, you have to see the place from which he wrote it, and that is what is almost never taught. Imagine Jerusalem in the year 520 before Christ, not the golden Jerusalem of David, not the Jerusalem of Solomon's temple, with the cedar walls and the beaten gold. The Jerusalem no longer exists. Nebuchadnezzar burned it 66 years earlier and carried the people away in chains to Babylon. What there is now is a village, a poor village, made of recycled rubble. The modern archaeological estimates for the Persian-era Jerusalem of this period are brutally modest. A small settlement of a few thousand inhabitants in the most generous calculation, and of barely a few hundred in the tighter ones. The walls are broken, the Temple Mount has the foundations laid, and nothing more, because the work stopped 16 years ago from political pressure and pure discouragement. And among those stones walks a young man. His name is Zechariah, in Hebrew Zechariah, and the name is not decorative. It's composed of 2 pieces, the verb zajar, which means to remember, and an abbreviated form of the divine name. This man's name means literally, the Lord remembers. A man named God remembers, standing in the ruins of a city that everyone seemed to have forgotten. Zechariah was, besides a prophet, a priest. Nehemiah 12 mentions him within a priestly family, which means this man was not an outsider shouting from the desert. He was temple staff, a man of the system, someone who knew how to handle a censer and how to slaughter a lamb. And a priest without a functioning temple has very little left in his hands. Probably that's why his book is so obsessed with restoration. The first 8 chapters are night visions, 8 visions, one after another, almost all about the same thing. The city is coming back, the temple is going to be finished, the glory is going to return. It's a book written to lift a people up off the ground. And it worked. The temple was finished, Ezra 6 records it, and then something happens with the book. Starting in chapter 9, Zechariah changes. The tone darkens, the visions widen, and suddenly we're no longer talking about masonry. We're talking about a king who enters Jerusalem riding a donkey, about 30 pieces of silver thrown to the potter, about a stricken shepherd and scattered sheep, about a fountain opened for sin, about entire nations besieging the city, about a day that is neither day nor night. And here I have to be honest with you, because this channel doesn't make a living from hiding things. This division of the book is one of the oldest academic debates that exists about the Old Testament. Most modern specialists see a clear break between chapters 1 through 8 and chapters 9 through 14. The style changes, the vocabulary changes, the themes change, and the precise dates that abound in the first half disappear. Some propose that the second half was written later, or by another hand within the same prophetic school. Classical Jewish and Christian tradition holds to the unity of the book and attributes it all to Zechariah. I'm not going to resolve that debate in a video, and I deeply distrust anyone who tells you they've resolved it. What I can tell you, with total calm, is this: the discussion doesn't touch a single millimeter of what we're going to do today, because the New Testament treats chapters 9 through 14 as scripture, quotes them constantly, and Jesus himself quotes them. And there, in that disputed second half, is the only map of the return that exists in all the Hebrew Bible. It's an almost cruel irony. The most questioned piece of the book is the one that contains the most specific information no other prophet dared to give. Let's read it. Zechariah chapter 14 starts badly. It starts very badly. Behold, the day of the Lord is coming, and your spoil will be divided in your midst. The first key word is there, at the opening, and it's a technical expression that runs through all of Hebrew prophecy, Yivom Yiva, Yom Chabuch, the day of the Lord. In English, it sounds like a Sunday. In Hebrew, it sounds like nothing of the sort. The Yom Yhwh is the day when God stops being a spectator. It's the day when the patience runs out and history breaks. Amos used it to terrify the Israelites who were awaiting it with enthusiasm, and told them that that day would be darkness and not light, like a man who flees from a lion and runs into a bear. It's not a pretty day. It's the day the account is settled. And Zechariah opens it with the worst possible image. The city sacked, the houses destroyed, half the population marching into exile. Verse 2. All the nations gathered against Jerusalem. All. Not one empire, not a coalition, all. And at the exact moment when the text has taken you to the bottom of the pit, when there's no possible way out, when the city is split in half and those who remain are watching the others leave in chains, comes line 3. And verse 3 is one of the most violent and most beautiful sentences in the Old Testament. Then the Lord will go out and fight against those nations as he fights on the day of battle. But he will go out. Notice the verb. It doesn't say he will send. It doesn't say he will raise up an army or stir up a king or dispatch an angel. It says he goes out himself, in person, like a man who rises from his chair, pushes the door open and walks toward the fight. And then comes line 4, the verse no one else wrote. And his feet will stand on that day on the Mount of Olives, which lies before Jerusalem on the east. Read it again. His feet. A spiritual being does not have feet that stand on a surface. A metaphor doesn't need a cardinal orientation. And yet the text stops to clarify for you that the ridge is to the east of the city, as if it were giving you directions to get there. It's a geographical detail that's redundant, unnecessary, almost obsessive. Zechariah writes from Jerusalem. His original readers knew perfectly well where the Mount of Olives was. They could see it from the doorways of their houses. And even so he clarifies it? Yes. And that excess of precision, that clarification that's superfluous, is one of the strongest signs that the text wants to be read as a real location and not as a poetic figure. In Hebrew, the name is Har HaZeitim, Har HaZeitim, the Mount of the Olives, a limestone ridge a little over half a mile long that rises on the other side of the Kidron Valley, some 260 feet higher than the Temple Mount. From the top, you can see the whole city. It is literally the balcony of Jerusalem. And here is where I have to ask you for something. Before we go on, give this video a like and share it with someone who loves the Bible. What's coming now is the part no one teaches, and every person who shares it makes this text reach someone who has spent years reading Zechariah 14 without seeing what they're about to see. Because now we have to go back to the frozen scene. The 11 men, the stretched necks, the empty sky. Luke writes in Acts 1 that 2 men in white garments stood beside them and spoke to them. And what they tell them is this, in verse 11, "This same Jesus, who has been taken from you into heaven, will come in the same way as you have seen him go into heaven." In the same way, that's the word. In Greek, outos, hotos, and that word does an enormous job for its size. Hotos does not mean eventually. It doesn't mean in some fashion, and it doesn't mean in a certain sense. It means in this manner, in this way, thus exactly as it has just happened. It's an adverb of manner, and its function is to establish a correspondence between two events. What you're seeing now is the mold of what you're going to see later. The angels are not telling them he's going to come back someday. They're telling them, pay attention to how he left, because that's how he's going to come back. And then Luke, 2 sentences later, makes the note that changes everything. He writes, "Then they returned to Jerusalem from the mountain called Olivet." Think about it slowly, because it's easy to skim over it and miss it. Luke is writing a historical document. He's not doing poetic theology. He's recording a location, the way a notary would record it. And the location he records is exactly the one Zechariah wrote 500 years earlier. Jesus leaves from the Mount of Olives. The angels say, that's how he'll return. Zechariah says his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives. The circle closes. Now then, I want to be careful because there's an easy trap here, and I'm not going to fall into it with you. There are those who say Luke is quoting Zechariah. He isn't. There's no citation formula. There's no that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophet. There are no quotation marks. Luke simply reports the place, and that, if you think about it carefully, is even stronger. Because when an author quotes a prophet, he's building an argument. He's saying, look, this fits. But when an author simply reports a geographical fact without flagging it, without underlining it, without asking you to notice it, and that fact coincides with the only text in the Old Testament that gives the location of the return, then you're not looking at an argument. You're looking at a coincidence the author himself isn't trying to sell you. And those are the ones that carry weight. Let's pause for a moment on something that usually generates questions, because I want you to leave this video with the tools and not only with the emotion. Is there only one way to read Zechariah 14? No. There are three great schools, and it's worth your knowing them. The literal, futurist reading holds that this chapter describes physical events that have not yet occurred. The siege, the bodily return, the splitting of the mountain, the earthly kingdom. The symbolic reading holds that the language is apocalyptic. That is, a genre that uses cosmic images to speak of spiritual realities, and that the Mount of Olives splitting represents the definitive victory of God over his enemies, not a seismic event. And there's a historical reading that looks for fulfillments in the past, whether in the Maccabean period or in the Jewish-Roman War of the year 70. I'm not going to tell you that one is the truth and the others are lies. It would be dishonest, and besides, it would be unnecessary, because the finding we're following works in all of them. Whatever your school, the fact remains intact. Zechariah is the only prophet who put a proper name on the map. The others gave the sky, he gave the ground, and we still haven't gotten to the strangest part. Because line 4 doesn't end with the feet, it continues, and what follows is a verb. But before the verb, I have to ask you a question you may already be asking yourself. If Zechariah is so important, why does no one preach him? Think about it. When was the last time you heard a sermon on Zechariah? When was the last time anyone in your church opened chapter 3 or 6 or 11? Probably never. Zechariah is one of those books people cross at top speed in the annual reading plan between Haggai and Malachi, in a zone of the Bible where the pages are clean because nobody touches them. And here comes the biggest paradox of all. That book almost no one reads today was one of the books most used by the authors of the New Testament. The calculations vary depending on how the allusions are counted, and that's why you're going to see different figures in different commentaries. But even in the most conservative estimates, the New Testament quotes or alludes to Zechariah more than 40 times. It's the most quoted of the 12 minor prophets by far. And considering how short the book is, there are specialists who argue that proportionally to its size, it's among the Old Testament texts most drawn upon by the apostles. And there are two more facts that make this even clearer. The first, the evangelists turn to chapters 9 through 14 of Zechariah in the Passion narratives more than to any other portion of the Old Testament. When the moment came to tell the hardest week of their lives, they reached for this book again and again. The second, the book of Revelation leans on Zechariah more than on any other book of the Old Testament, with the sole exception of Ezekiel. And once you know that, you can't read Revelation the same way. Let me give you two examples, and brace yourself, because one of them is too much. Revelation 6, the 4 horsemen. It's probably the most famous image of the whole book, the one that has inspired the most paintings, the most films, the most nightmares. 4 horses of 4 colors go out to ride through the earth. Where is the origin of that image? Zechariah 1, verses 8 through 11, the first night vision of the prophet, a man riding a red horse among the myrtles, and behind him horses of other colors. And the prophet asks what they are. And they answer him, "They are the ones the Lord has sent to patrol the earth." And again in Zechariah 6, verses 1 through 8, 4 chariots with horses of different colors coming out from between 2 mountains of bronze, sent to the 4 winds of heaven. Colored horses, sent to patrol the earth, 4 directions. The horsemen of Revelation were not born in Revelation. They were born in the night visions of a Jewish priest in a city in ruins. And now the second example, and this one cost me sleep the first time I saw it, Zechariah 4. Another vision. The prophet sees a lampstand of solid gold with 7 lamps, and on either side of the lampstand he sees 2 olive trees, 2 trees, and he asks what those 2 olive trees are. And they answer him that they are the 2 anointed ones who stand before the Lord of all the earth. Now go to Revelation 11, verse 4. John is describing the 2 witnesses, and he writes, "These witnesses are the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands that stand before the God of the earth." The 2 olive trees, it's a direct quotation of Zechariah 4. And now tell me the name of the mountain, the Mount of Olives. Har Zaitim. I'm not saying Zechariah 4 is a prophecy about the mountain. It isn't. And I'm not going to stretch the text to make it say something it doesn't say, because that's exactly what the people who ruin the Bible do. What I'm saying is simpler and more overwhelming. The olive tree runs through this prophet from end to end. Olive oil fed the lampstand of the temple. The olive tree was the symbol of anointing, and anointed in Hebrew is said Mashiach, from which comes the word Messiah. The hill where the Lord stands in chapter 14 is the Mount of the Olives. And the 2 witnesses at the end of history are, in John's words taken from Zechariah, 2 olive trees. This book is soaked in oil, and there's one last thing about this book you have to know, and it's the saddest detail of all. In Matthew 23, verse 35, Jesus is pronouncing the woes against the scribes and Pharisees, and he speaks to them of all the righteous blood shed on the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, son of Berechiah, whom they killed between the temple and the altar. Zechariah, son of Berechiah. That is exactly the name and the lineage with which the book we're reading opens. Zechariah 1 verse 1, the word of the Lord came to Zechariah, son of Berechiah, son of Iddo. There is debate about which Zechariah exactly Jesus is referring to, and I'm not going to pretend that debate is closed, because there's another Zechariah in 2 Chronicles 24 who was stoned in the courtyard of the temple. The question is disputed, and it's honest to say so. It's just that if Jesus was referring to the prophet, then the scene is this. The man who wrote the name of the mountain where the feet of the Lord would return was murdered on the floor of the temple, whose reconstruction he himself had encouraged. He died in the building he helped to raise. And 500 years later, another man quoted him on the way to Gethsemane. That man had it all in his head, the entire book. And on the darkest night of his life, while he walked over the stones of the Mount of Olives, he pulled a verse from Zechariah and said it to his friends. We're going to get to that night, it's not far off, but first we need the verb. And the Mount of Olives will be split in 2 toward the east and toward the west, making a very great valley. And half of the mountain will move toward the north and the other half toward the south. There it is. Now if you read that in English, the most likely thing is that your head builds an image of destruction, an earthquake, the ridge crumbling, stones rolling, dust, a catastrophe. And that image is wrong, because the Hebrew doesn't say that. The verb Zechariah uses here is vnibka, venivka. It comes from the root baka, bakar. And bakar does not mean to collapse, it doesn't mean to cave in, it doesn't mean to sink or to crumble. Bakar means to cleave, to split in two, to cut open cleanly, deliberately, like someone opening something with a knife. It's a verb of opening, not of destruction. It's used in Hebrew for splitting firewood, for opening the belly of an animal, for breaking the shell of an egg. It's a controlled movement with intention that produces two halves and a space between them. And now I want you to hold your breath for a second, because here comes the finding. Do you know where else that root appears? In one of the most famous scenes in the whole Bible, Exodus 14, verse 16. God tells Moses to lift up his staff, stretch out his hand over the sea, and divide it. The verb is bakar. Verse 21, the wind blows all night and the waters are divided. Again the same root. The Red Sea did not evaporate. It did not dry up. It did not disappear. It was cleft, bakar. And now come back with me to the mountain. Zechariah is not describing a collapse. He is describing the same action with the same verb applied to stone instead of to water. The sea was cleft. The high ground is cleft. And if that still seems to you a linguistic coincidence, then you need to read the following verse, because line 5 gives you the purpose. And the purpose is what makes everything fit together with a click so loud it's going to keep ringing in your head. Zechariah 14 verse 5, and you shall flee to the valley of the mountains, for the valley of the mountains shall reach to Azal. You shall flee. The mountain does not open to destroy anyone. It opens to let people through. It's an escape route, exactly like the Red Sea. Stop on this. Go back to Exodus for a moment and put yourself on the Israelite side, with your feet in the mud and Pharaoh's army raising dust at your back. 600 chariots. The sound of the wheels, the sea in front. The geography has you trapped. Water ahead, iron behind, and no road. And then the water opens, and what was the barrier becomes the road. That is what Zechariah is describing. Jerusalem besieged by all the nations, no way out. The Mount of Olives is the wall that blocks you to the east, the ridge that rises 260 feet and cuts off your escape. It's the last thing you'd want in front of you if you were running for your life. And that wall opens. And what was the barrier becomes the road. Same verb, same movement, same purpose, 1,000 years apart. Zechariah is not describing the end of the world. He is describing an exodus. And I want you to know that this is not a reading of mine, invented for a video. The connection between these two passages was seen by Jewish readers from very early on. The Targum, which is the Aramaic translation and paraphrase that was read in the synagogues, when it reaches verse 3 of Zechariah 14, there, where the Hebrew text says, "The Lord will fight as he fights on the day of battle," the Targum adds 3 words of clarification that the Hebrew does not have. It adds, "at the Red Sea." That is, the ancient Jewish translators themselves reading this scene understood without anyone's help that Zechariah was painting the scene of the Exodus. They understood it so clearly that they wrote it in the margin so no one would miss it. They were reading the same thing you've just read. And this changes the entire tone of the chapter. Because if the model is the Exodus, then the second coming is not principally an event of annihilation. It's an event of rescue. The destruction of the enemies happens, yes, and the chapter describes it. But it's a consequence, not a purpose. In Exodus 14, God did not open the sea to drown the Egyptians. He opened the sea to get his people out. The Egyptians drowned because they decided to go in behind them. Read the rest of the chapter with those eyes, and you'll see how everything reorganizes itself. Verse 5, second half. And the Lord my God will come, and all the holy ones with him. The Hebrew word here is kadoshim, kedoshim, the holy ones, the set-apart ones, the consecrated ones. And the term is ambiguous in Hebrew deliberately. It can refer to angelic beings, or to the redeemed, or to both. Paul is going to use exactly this image in 1 Thessalonians 3, verse 13, when he speaks of the coming of the Lord with all his holy ones. Jude, in his letter, quotes an identical tradition. The one who goes out to fight does not come alone. He comes with a multitude. Verses 6 and 7, there will be no light, neither clear nor dark. It will be a unique day known only to the Lord. It will be neither day nor night. And here, there's another precious detail that gets lost in translation. The Hebrew says literally that it will be one day, Yom Ejad. And that expression, one day, appears in Genesis 1 verse 5 to describe the first day of creation. Zechariah is using the vocabulary of Genesis to describe the end. He's telling you that that day is not the last day of the old history. It's the first day of something else. And he closes the verse with a phrase that seems like a logical error. It will come to pass that at evening time there will be light. The reverse of everything. Evening falls, and instead of getting dark, it lights up. It's a world whose basic rules have been inverted. John is going to pick up exactly this image in Revelation 21, when he writes that the city has no need of sun or moon, and that there will be no night there. Verse 8. Living waters will flow out from Jerusalem, half toward the eastern sea and half toward the western sea, in summer and in winter. That is, a permanent river that does not dry up in the dry season, springing from a city that in historical reality has no river. Jerusalem is one of the few ancient capitals in the world built without access to a significant watercourse. Its only real source is the Gihon spring, which barely sufficed to sustain the population. Ezekiel had seen the same thing in his chapter 47, and John will see it in Revelation 22. The city without a river becomes the fountain of the world. And then comes verse 9, and it's the hinge of the whole book. And the Lord will be king over all the earth. On that day, the Lord will be one, and his name one. King, Melech, over all the earth. And that phrase, the Lord will be one, is not just any phrase, it's a quotation. It's the Shema, the confession of faith that every Jew has recited twice a day for 3,000 years. Hear, Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Zechariah is saying that a day will come when what is confessed today with the mouth will be at last visible to the eyes. It stops being a declaration of faith and becomes a description of the landscape. And now, with all of that in hand, we have to go back 2 chapters, because there's a verse we skipped, and it's the most important of the 14. It's the verse John used twice, and it's the verse that the most famous Greek translation in history completely ruined. Zechariah 12, verse 10, "And I will pour out on the house of David and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and of supplication, and they will look on me, whom they pierced, and they will mourn for him as one mourns for an only son, and grieve for him as one grieves for a firstborn." Read it slowly, and notice the pronoun, because the pronoun is a bomb. They will look on me. Who is speaking? God. It's God who speaks in the first person throughout the passage. It's He who pours out the Spirit. He is the subject of the entire verse. And then he says, "They will look on me, whom they pierced." How do you pierce God? This verse has been such an enormous problem for so many commentators over so many centuries that entire libraries have been written on it alone. A God who has no body, who is spirit, whom no man has ever seen, says that they are going to look on him, and that they are going to look on him as the one they ran through. And the Hebrew verb leaves no room to soften it. It's daqar, daqaru, from the root daqar. Daqar does not mean to wound. It doesn't mean to hurt. It doesn't mean to offend or to despise or any of the comfortable spiritual readings that have been hung on this passage. Daqar means to run through with a sharp object. It's used in the Old Testament for spears, for swords, for the physical act of putting a blade of metal inside a body. It's a verb of blood. And now we have to ask the obvious. Who wrote about this verse? John. And he did it twice. The first time in his Gospel, chapter 19. It's the scene of the cross. The soldiers come to break the legs of the 3 crucified men because it's the preparation and the bodies cannot remain hanging during the Sabbath. They break the legs of the 2 thieves. They come to Jesus and see he's already dead, so they don't break his. But one of them, as protocol to make sure, puts the spear into his side. And John, who says he was there, who insists with an almost desperate vehemence that his testimony is true, writes in line 37, "And again another scripture says, they will look on him whom they pierced." Zechariah 12:10. The second time John uses this verse is not in the Gospel, it's in Revelation, chapter 1, verse 7. And he's no longer talking about the cross. "Behold, he comes with the clouds, and every eye will see him, and those who pierced him." There you have it, the same verse of the Old Testament, used by the same author, applied to 2 different events, the first time to the spear, the second time to the return. And here is where this video gets really interesting, because there's a story behind this verse that almost no one tells, and it's a story about an error, a famous error, a documented error, and an error the apostles saw and decided to ignore. Let's go to Alexandria. We're in Egypt at some point in the 3rd or 2nd century before Christ. The Jewish community of the city is enormous, prosperous, cultured, and it has a problem. Its children no longer speak Hebrew. They speak Greek. They were born speaking Greek, they dream in Greek, and they cannot read the scriptures of their grandparents. So a monumental project is undertaken to translate the entire Hebrew Bible into Greek. The result is the Septuagint, and its importance is almost impossible to exaggerate. It was the Bible of the diaspora synagogues for centuries. It was, to a large extent, the Bible of the first Christians. When Paul quotes the Old Testament in his letters, very often he's quoting the Septuagint. When the evangelists write, the Septuagint is in the air they breathe. And now imagine a translator, seated, a man whose name we will never know. He has before him a scroll of Zechariah written in consonantal Hebrew without vowels, with letters made by hand by a scribe who perhaps copied from another scribe who copied from another. He reaches chapter 12. He reaches verse 10. And he reaches the word, daqar, dalet, kof, resh. And here you have to understand something about Hebrew writing. The letter dalet and the letter resh are, graphically, almost twins. They're distinguished by a minimal detail in the upper right corner of the stroke, in a worn manuscript, in a copy made in haste, with the ink run or the leather scuffed. Telling them apart can be genuinely difficult. And there exists another Hebrew root, rqad, resh, kof, dalet. The same 3 letters, in the reverse order, raqad. And raqad means to leap, to dance, to skip. The translator of Alexandria, for whatever reason, read the wrong word. And where the Hebrew said whom they pierced, he wrote katorgisando, katorgesanto, a Greek verb that means, more or less, they danced upon with contempt, to mock, to scorn. The Septuagint of Zechariah 12:10 does not say they will look on me whom they pierced. It says they will look on me because they mocked. The spear disappeared. The pierced body disappeared. What was left was a verbal offense, a mockery, something that leaves no mark. And this is the point at which I need you to stop and feel the full weight of what I'm going to say, because it's the reason I made this video. John had the Septuagint available. Everyone had it. It was the standard text, and John did not use it. In Gospel 19:37 and again in Revelation 1:7, John writes the verb exekentesan, which means, without the slightest ambiguity, they pierced, they ran through with something sharp. It's the correct translation of the Hebrew daqar, and it's not the one that was in the Septuagint. Where did he get it? Here, the specialists have a fairly solid answer. There existed other Greek versions of the Old Testament, revisions made to bring the Greek text closer to the Hebrew, the ones associated with the names of Aquila, Symmachus, and Theodotion. And in those versions, the word of Zechariah 12:10 is exactly the one John uses, exekentasan. They pierced. There is a preserved Greek manuscript that preserves that reading, and there is evidence that a recension of this type, more faithful to the Hebrew, was already circulating in the 1st century. That is, John had before him a popular translation that said, "They mocked," and another textual tradition, harder to come by, more faithful to the original, that said, "They pierced him." And he chose the second, the fisherman of Galilee, the man the Sanhedrin called unlettered in Acts 4, chose correctly between two Greek textual traditions of the book of Zechariah, and he chose the one that coincided with what he had seen with his own eyes that afternoon, standing a few yards from a cross when a Roman soldier raised the shaft and drove it in. If this is blowing your mind as much as it blew mine, subscribe to the channel. This is what we do here. Go down into the text, letter by letter, and see what's underneath the translation. Now then, I have to tell you something, and I'd rather say it myself before you read it in a comment. This passage is still disputed. The question of who exactly the pierced one is in the original Hebrew, whether it's God himself or a representative of his, is a serious and ancient debate, and it's not closed. There are late Hebrew manuscripts that change the on me to an on him, precisely because the on me was theologically unbearable. The oldest and best manuscripts preserve the on me. I'm not going to tell you the discussion is settled. I'm going to tell you something more honest and, in my opinion, stronger. The harder text, the one that suited no one, the one the copyists wanted to soften, the one the Septuagint erased, is the one John chose, and that word is still there. And now that you have it, and now that you know what it means, I want us to go back to Revelation 1:7 and read it complete, with everything we've learned today on top of it. Behold, he comes with the clouds, and every eye will see him, and those who pierced him, and all the tribes of the earth will mourn because of him. Those who pierced him, they're going to see him. It's not a figure of speech. It's not an ambiguous expression. It's the word exekentasan. It's the spear. And this is the most brutal detail of the whole chapter 14, the one that makes everything else fall into place. The text does not say that the one who made the world will arrive. It doesn't say a force will arrive. It says someone identifiable will arrive, someone who can be recognized by a mark. And there's another mark, another one this same prophet wrote 3 chapters earlier, Zechariah 11, and it's the most bitter passage in the book. The prophet is playing a role. He acts as the shepherd of a flock destined for slaughter, a flock whose own owners sell it and grow fat on the money. And in the end, fed up, he resigns, and he tells them in verse 12, "If it seems good to you, give me my wages, and if not, keep them." And they weighed out his wages, 30 pieces of silver. Now you have to know what that figure meant, because it's not a random number. Exodus 21, verse 32. The law of the goring ox. If an ox kills a free man, there's a process. But if an ox kills a slave, the owner of the ox pays the owner of the slave 30 shekels of silver. 30 pieces of silver is the legal price of a dead slave. It's not a wage. It's an insult in the shape of a payment. And the following line, 13, says it without mercy. God speaks, and the irony is so sharp it cuts. A magnificent price at which they valued me, at which they valued me. That is the value they placed on God, the price of a dead slave. And then the order, cast it away, throw it. And the Hebrew here has a word that has generated centuries of discussion because the Masoretic text says to throw it to the Ivotiser, Hayotzer, the potter. And there are ancient textual traditions, like the Syriac version, that read Avotsar Otsar, which means treasury. The two Hebrew words are distinguished by a single letter, potter, treasury. And now open Matthew 27. Judas repents. He brings back the 30 pieces. The priests don't want them because it's blood money. And Judas does what he does. He throws the coins into the temple, into the treasury. And then the priests, who cannot put that money into the offering chest, decide to use it to buy a field, the potter's field, the two words, the two readings of the Hebrew text, treasury and potter. And the two occur in the same scene, in the same chapter, with the same money. I don't know what to do with that except stay quiet for a moment. Now then, I have to be honest with you about something, because if I don't say it, you're going to read it in the comments. And rightly so. Matthew, when he tells this scene, writes in verse 9, "Then was fulfilled what was spoken by the prophet Jeremiah." Jeremiah. And the quotation is from Zechariah. This is one of the oldest and most disputed textual problems in the New Testament, and I'm not going to lie to you or sweep it under the rug. There are 3 serious explanations on the table, and none of them is a cheap excuse. The first, Matthew is quoting a complex of texts, not a single one. The scene has elements of Zechariah 11, yes, but it also has clearly Jeremianic elements. Jeremiah 19 is an entire passage about a potter, a broken vessel, the valley of Hinnom, and innocent bloodshed. Jeremiah 32 tells how the prophet buys a field and weighs out the silver on a scale. The ingredients of Matthew's scene are distributed between the two prophets, and Matthew may have been naming the greater of the two, which was the practice when quoting a combination. The second, there's an ancient rabbinic tradition recorded in the Talmud that ordered the prophetic books beginning with Jeremiah, and there was the custom of referring to an entire scroll by the name of the book that headed it. If Matthew was quoting the scroll of the prophets, naming it as Jeremiah would not be an error, but a convention. The third, the simplest, an early copyist's error. There are ancient manuscripts that omit the name, and some that put Zechariah. Which is correct? I don't know. Nobody knows with certainty, and whoever tells you otherwise is selling you false security. What I do know is this, and I want you to take it with you. When an ancient text has a problem this visible, this easy to detect, and even so, Christians copied it for 20 centuries, without erasing it, without fixing it, without cleaning it up. That tells you something about what kind of people were doing the copying. It would have been the easiest thing in the world to change a word. Cross out Jeremiah, write Zechariah, and the problem disappears forever. They didn't do it. They preferred to leave the discomfort there, on the page, for 2,000 years, rather than touch the text they had received. And those are the people who handed you the book you have in your hands. Now let's go back to the marks, because we have the donkey from chapter 9, we have the silver from chapter 11, we have the stricken shepherd from chapter 13, we have the spear from chapter 12. And all of that already happened. All of that is in the past. Verifiable, dated, occurred before witnesses who wrote down what they saw, and from the same scroll, from the same man, with the same ink, comes chapter 14. The feet, the ridge, the verb. That has not happened yet. And if you have the stomach to ask yourself the question, ask it now. Why would you believe half of a scroll and not the other? Now I have to take you backward, 5 chapters back, to chapter 9, because Zechariah wrote 2 arrivals. Zechariah 9, verse 9, "Rejoice greatly, daughter of Zion. Shout aloud, daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king comes to you, righteous and bringing salvation, humble, and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey." You recognize it. Everyone recognizes it. It's Palm Sunday. It's Matthew 21. It's John 12. It's the scene of the palms and the cloaks on the ground and the people shouting Hosanna. And now look at the 2 verses together in the same scroll from the same man. Chapter 9. A king who enters humble, mounted on the most modest animal of the ancient world, a donkey, the animal of the poor and the merchants, the one that frightens no one. Chapter 14. A king whose feet split a ridge of stone in two, and who arrives with all the hosts of heaven behind him. 5 chapters apart on the parchment. 2,000 years apart on the calendar. And here's what I want you to understand, because it changes the way you read prophecy forever. None of those who read Zechariah in the 1st century could see that distance. For them, those 2 texts were the same event. The Messiah arrives, enters the city, defeats the enemies, reigns. One single arrival, a continuous movement. The Jewish readers of the Second Temple expected a single coming, and there was no textual reason to think otherwise. And then a man arrived riding a donkey, and he fulfilled chapter 9. And he did not fulfill chapter 14. Imagine the confusion. Imagine what it was to be there, waving a palm branch, seeing the king enter exactly as it was written, with the prophecy fulfilling itself before your eyes, down to the last detail of the colt, and expecting the next part to start at any moment. And 5 days later he was dead. The disciples understood nothing, and the Gospels, with an honesty that still amazes me, don't hide it. John says it without hedging in chapter 12, verse 16. His disciples did not understand these things at first, but when Jesus was glorified, then they remembered that these things were written about him. They did not understand at first. And there's a moment in the life of Jesus where all of this comes together in a way so precise that when I saw it for the first time, I had to reread it 3 times to make sure I wasn't inventing the connection. It's Thursday night. Matthew 26. They've just finished the Last Supper, and line 30 says something we all read without thinking. And when they had sung the hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. They went out to the Mount of Olives. They're walking through the olive grove, along that ridge, over the exact piece of limestone we've been talking about since the beginning of this video. And the following verse, 31, says this. Then Jesus said to them, "You will all be made to stumble because of me this night, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered." That is a quotation. It's Zechariah 13, verse 7. Jesus is walking on the Mount of Olives the night before dying, quoting Zechariah, the Mount of Olives that Zechariah named, quoting the book that named it. And he doesn't flag it. He doesn't say, by the way, this is the mountain the prophet spoke of. He simply walks and quotes and keeps walking toward the garden where he's going to sweat and be arrested. The 11 men who go with him hear the quotation and understand nothing. Peter even argues and says that he will never be made to stumble. And a few hours later, he's going to be swearing in front of a servant girl that he doesn't know the man. The shepherd was struck, the sheep scattered, exactly as the prophet wrote. And 50-some days later, those same men gathered again are going to be standing on that same mountain, looking at the sky, without knowing that the text that has been pursuing them their whole lives has just given them the last piece. Now let me clear up 2 things before closing, because I don't want you leaving here with garbage in your pocket. First, there's a verse in Zechariah 13, line 6, that says, "What are these wounds in your hands?" And you're going to find piles of videos and sermons that tell you that's a prophecy of the nails. It isn't, or at least not directly. If you read the immediate context from verse 2 to 6, Zechariah is talking about false prophets who will be shamed and will deny having been prophets. The wounds of verse 6, in the reading of most specialists, are the marks that pagan prophets made on themselves in ecstatic rituals, like the prophets of Baal, who gashed themselves with knives on Mount Carmel. It's a beautiful verse, and there's an ancient Christian tradition of reading it Christologically. But if they sell it to you as direct proof, they're selling you smoke, and I'd rather be the one to tell you. Second, Verse 12 of chapter 14 describes a plague in which the flesh is consumed while the person is standing. And you're going to find people telling you that's a description of a nuclear explosion. It isn't. It's holy war plague language of the same kind that appears in Deuteronomy 28. Reading atomic bombs into a text of the 6th century before Christ is not depth, it's anachronism. And every time a Christian does that, he hands free ammunition to whoever wants to mock the Bible. The text is strong enough without anyone adding special effects to it. And third, and this one hurts me because it's the most tempting of all, you're going to find everywhere the claim that there exists a confirmed geological fault that crosses the Mount of Olives exactly from east to west, just as line 4 says. It appears in books, in sermons, in hundreds of videos, and it sounds spectacular. It's the kind of fact you want to be true. I'm not going to give it to you, and not because I know it's false, but because I can't verify it with a solid source. And I'm not going to build your faith on a piece of data I can't hold up. The region is seismically active. That is unquestionable. The Jordan Valley sits on one of the most important tectonic fractures on the planet, and Zechariah himself, in verse 5, mentions a historical earthquake that occurred in the days of King Uzziah, an event for which there is archaeological confirmation at several sites. All of that is real. But the leap from there to science confirmed the prophecy is a leap many people make cheerfully, and that I'm not going to make with you. Because if someday that piece of data turns out to be a repeated exaggeration, and you built your confidence in the text on it, what are you left with? The word of Zechariah doesn't need science to sign it a permit. It has spent 25 centuries holding itself up alone. And now let's go to the ending. Because the book of Zechariah does not end with the hills splitting, it doesn't end with the nations defeated, it doesn't end with the throne, it ends with horses. Zechariah 14 verse 20. On that day there will be engraved on the little bells of the horses, holiness to the Lord. Little bells of horses, the jingles, the metal ornaments that hang from the harness of a draft animal, and that jingle when it walks. The most insignificant, most everyday, most profoundly unimportant thing you can imagine in the ancient world, an object nobody looks at, a piece of bronze that makes noise. In Hebrew, they are empty silvot, metzilot, and what is going to be engraved on them? Kodeshi lechva, Kodesh la-yish-wh, holiness to the Lord. And now you have to know where that inscription comes from, because this is where the whole book closes like a trap. Exodus 28 verse 36. God is giving Moses the instructions for the garments of the high priest, and he tells him to make a plate of pure gold, and to engrave on it, as a seal is engraved, these words, holiness to the Lord, and to place it on the turban, on the forehead of Aaron. That inscription existed in one single place in the entire Hebrew universe. On the forehead of the holiest man of the people, the only one who could enter the Holy of Holies, and only one day a year, and only with blood and trembling. It was the mark of the most set apart, the most untouchable, the most dangerously sacred thing that existed. And Zechariah says that one day that inscription is going to be hanging from the neck of a horse. Think about what that means. It doesn't mean the horse became sacred. It means the distance is over. Throughout the whole history of Israel, there was a system of concentric circles. Outside the camp, the unclean; the camp, the common; the courtyard, the clean; the holy place, the sacred; the holy of holies, the presence. And every border had guards, blood, rituals, death for whoever crossed it wrongly. The whole Hebrew religion was, in a certain sense, a map of distances. And Zechariah closes his book saying that a day will come when the lines of the map are going to be erased. That holiness is going to overflow the plate of gold, is going to leap the border of the temple, is going to come down through the streets, and is going to reach the cooking pots of the kitchens and the bells of the pack animals. Line 21 finishes it off. Every pot in Jerusalem and in Judah shall be consecrated to the Lord. Every pot. The pan where a woman boils lentils for her children is going to have the same status as the utensils of the altar. It's not that the temple grew. It's that the whole world became the temple. And the last sentence Zechariah writes in his entire prophecy, the last line of the book is this: "And there will no longer be a merchant in the house of the Lord of hosts on that day." There will no longer be merchants in the house of God. And 500 years later, a carpenter from Nazareth entered the temple, made a whip of cords, overturned the tables, scattered the coins across the floor, and drove the merchants out with shouts. He was fulfilling the last verse of Zechariah. And no one in that crowd noticed. Now I want you to do one thing for me. Close your eyes for a second and stand on that mountain, not the one of the future, the one of that morning. The morning of the 11 men with their necks stretched and the empty sky, the air of Jerusalem in spring, the dusty olive grove, the valley below, the walls of the city on the other side, and 11 terrified guys with no plan, no leader, nothing, staring at a piece of air. None of them was anybody. A fisherman who had denied his master 3 times, a tax collector, a political fanatic, ordinary men afraid at the worst moment of their lives. And they were standing in exactly the right place without knowing it. And that is the question I leave you with, and I want you to think about it seriously, not as a pretty way to close a video. Zechariah wrote the name of the mountain. He wrote the verb. He wrote the mark in the hands. He wrote the little bells of the horses. He wrote it all in the ruins of a city of mud, surrounded by people who no longer believed in anything, without any evidence that any of it would ever happen. And part of what he wrote has already happened. The donkey, the silver, the stricken shepherd, the spear, the merchants. It happened in front of people who weren't seeing it, who had the prophecy in their hands and did not recognize it when it walked past them. So the question is not whether Zechariah was right. The question is what you are holding right now without looking at it, what it is that is already happening in front of you, and whether your hands are going to be empty or full on the day those feet touch the stone. What you're about to see on the screen is not another video about prophecy. It's the next step of what you've just discovered today, and it goes somewhere you don't expect. Trust me. Click.